Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today. We are on the Santita Jackson Show, and we're on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, established by someone here, Dr. Terrain Reed. But, we can get into that another time. I
Yeah.
want to thank you for that. But please like and subscribe and click that bell so that when we come up, you will be notified. But Facebook contacted us and they said because of the traffic that we're getting, they need you to go from Facebook with the Santita Jackson and Friends page over to YouTube. But please, the only page that works for me on Facebook, because they keep purging people off of what was my personal page, which is what you have to establish, everybody. Please go to Santita Jackson and Friends. That's the page that I use. That's the page where you can find me. But please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel where we are streaming, and I want you to interact with the Morning Stars. Great conversation, great family that we've been able to create over there, and wonderful community. And you are all welcome. It's a joy to be with you today. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about what's happening in the Middle East. That is occupying a lot of space. Indeed, we hear Hamas has accepted a deal offered by Qatar and Egypt. Well, the United States, they say the United States is involved in this, but also Israel. Will they accept it? And is that all that the Palestinian people want? To stop shooting me? We're going to talk about that. But they've closed Al Jazeera. In fact, the Israeli government outlawed Al Jazeera, which was the largest international news organization there. We're going to talk about that, about press freedom. And then we're going to talk to some more young people, some more students, some more American youth about what their what is galvanizing their protest and how they plan to approach the election in the fall. Got a lot to talk about, but right now let's talk about our values and that which we value. And that is American education. The Chicago Teachers Union is now looking for another price hike, another salary hike, more than $51,000. Some people might say, oh my goodness, that pushes a teacher's salary up to $144,000 a year. But aren't they worth it? I mean, think about it. What could you do unless you learned your ABCs? What could you do unless you learned how to read and comprehend and calculate? What would you be able to do in this world without being taught, without being graded on your comportment in class, how you behaved, without having someone who sat with you, really, quite frankly, longer than your parents do every day, who can tell your parents, this is what's happening with your child, something we need to correct, something we need to encourage. So let's talk about it. Because the fact that our teachers have to get on picket lines and fight to get paid, there's something off about that to me. That's my own personal commentary about this. I mean, when I think about my own educational experience, the first person who got me my library card was my first grade teacher. She got me my first book bag. It was a blue patent leather book bag with black appliques and flowers all over it. She invested a lot in me, and she invested a lot in all of her students. And I was blessed to have students in the public school system who did that. My brothers were blessed to have it in the public and private school system. You need your teachers, and they need to be paid. And in American society, those people, those persons, those professions that we value, we pay the most. Imagine sitting at your dining room table with your children and you ask them what they want to do with their lives. If someone says they want to get an MBA and go into the business world, they'd get excited. You'd say, good for you. You want to be a physician? You'd be excited. You want to be a teacher? They say, oh, please. Are you serious? That is a tragic state of affairs in our country. Anytime that is what we're saying about our teachers, about the most necessary of professions. So, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, Esquire, who is an educator, but she is head of the Push for Excellence program out of Rainbow Push. She is also a lawyer and pastor. And we're so glad that you're with us today. And I cannot wait to hear from this brilliant educator and author. He's one of the nation's foremost educators, but we're glad to claim him here in Chicago. Chicago, Dr. Mike Bayer. I'm so glad that you're here. And your book is Pencils Down.
Pencils down, right?
Okay, I
Uh,
can't. And
Educators in the field and why.
absolutely, because we keep punching down on educators, and they're not. Many of them are. They're leaving the profession. What are we doing? Dr. Marnie Reeves, well, affectionately known to us as Marnie, those who know her and love her. She's a personal friend, as are each of you. But she's absolutely brilliant. She teaches in the New York public schools and high school, but she also is a professor at the City University of New York. She's a union leader, and an engineer. She's a designer. She does so many things. And one of the things that we all love about each of you is your fierce dedication to your students. Dr. Reeves gets her kids through uh, high school and then gets them into and through college. So she has a very interesting and unique perspective. And so, what say you about the Chicago Teachers Union pushing to get these teachers uh, paid a wage that I think is I think that's quite frankly that's where they need to begin.
So, thank you for having me, Santita. We just ended negotiations for our contracts here in New York City in June of last year. And one of the things that we wanted to ensure was that we were able to get a living wage, starting from teachers who came in year one to retirement. We wanted to ensure that when we look at the work of the teachers, we're not simply saying, oh, it's just that other job, or, we're not taking it seriously, because we do realize, as you mentioned before, that, one of the jobs that most oftentimes gets overlooked is that of a teacher, right? And for every president, for every lawyer, for every doctor, for every nurse that we've encountered, they actually got to where they are because of teachers. So paying them a fair living wage was absolutely necessary. While we asked for other things, that was very important, especially living in New York City. Cost of living keeps going up for many of our teachers. Some of them can't live within the city limits. They have to live outside of New York City in order to ensure that they can make ends meet. That was very important. What I do know about Chicago is that most teachers in Chicago, if not all, have to live within the limits of Chicago proper, right? The city of Chicago, which is also one of the most expensive places to live in. So when you have teachers that are not being paid enough to pay their rent or their mortgages, to even have an option to buy somewhere for themselves, that becomes problematic. Oftentimes when we think of education, we think of having a safe space for students. We think of ensuring that we have staff who are properly trained so that they can go into the classroom and ensure that they're loving every child that they encounter to understanding. However, we oftentimes forget that paying people for what they're worth, not just what they work, is very important. And in Chicago, that has been one of the things that has been overlooked all these years. So with teachers asking to be paid a salary of $144,000 a year, um, I looked at what the starting salary would be, because that's what we do here in New York. We look at the starting salary. We look at what their educational achievement is, their attainment, and they're paid based on those levels of achievement and years of service. Um, I do agree that the teachers in Chicago should get a fair wage increase. I also agree that with that fair increase, and for many people it might sound like blasphemy, that they should get health care and premium free health care. at that, because oftentimes, regardless of the number of wage increases that we offer, we find that in some states, in some cities, they also increase the healthcare premiums that people have to pay, which means that you're really not giving me a fair wage increase, because that money ends up going back into my healthcare, right? So what should the teachers of New York of Chicago get, similar to what the teachers in New York City asked for, is not only to have a fair wage increase, but also to have health care for themselves and their families. Um, I also believe, and this was something I, I thought of years ago when the conversation was first brought up about the teachers in Chicago getting a fair wage increase, was to remove the barriers that have been put in place for them to live outside of Chicago. It's You're forcing people to live within the city limits, when a lot of times they can travel from outside into the city limits if they really choose to do so. Also, you're limiting um, access. You can't have all these barriers in place and expect the best, right? And I think Chicago needs to understand that if you're raising the bar and having teachers raise the bar for students, they need to also raise the bar in how they're treating those who are raising the bar for those students. The teachers in Chicago get the work done. They're always there regardless. I realize even through COVID that many of them had to report into the school buildings, while many of us here in New York had the opportunity to be at home for certain periods of time. And many teachers in Chicago had to report to those very schools that had a lot of issues. So I really do believe that the mayor of Chicago needs to sit down as a former educator himself to really look at not just the cost of living, but the worth of the teachers who he is expecting to ensure success in the students in Chicago. Because if you're not investing in the children through the teachers, then the expectation should not be for every child to succeed. Every child cannot succeed when the people who you're asking to ensure their success cannot even afford to eat.
Well, I will tell you this. I mean, we do have a mayor who cares deeply about education, but I think that what he has found, that now that he is the mayor, it's one thing to aspire to be mayor, is another thing to run, another thing to have to govern. Because
Yes,
even the people who voted against you and who fight you with all of their might, corporate and personal,
yes,
he's still their mayor.
yes,
And so it's not up to him, because he's someone who fought for that. I think it's going to be up to us, um, Dr. Byer. I mean, because I think we're going to have a reset, Dr. Reeves, Reverend Dr. Wilson, and Dr. Byer, about our values, because we balk at paying teachers. We hear a six-figure income. Well, what are you doing? Our children can't read. You sent your child to school. You didn't expose them to books. They're not getting exposed at home. I mean, there's a lot there. So what do you say about this push to get these teachers, you know, another kind of wage? What do you think that would do to the profession if we paid teachers, and if we had the expectations of public school teachers that we have in prep schools? In prep schools, you have master's degrees and they are paid and they're treated as professors. We don't do that in America. Just generally speaking, we don't do it.
Yeah, I think the values question is a big one, and I see that as the underpinning of where we're at.
Mhm.
If you look back at the history of teaching and education in the United States, the truth is we don't value it very much, right? We look down on, as a culture, as a country, you know, this elite status, right? We had
Mhm.
a former president who, you know, a lot of the supporters were not in support of just the idea of being educated, right? Almost, laughing at this notion of, that there's facts, like real facts, right? Provable facts. And so, it's not just values. I think it's just also, trends within our country that we have to overcome. That's one huge obstacle that for an advanced nation, we don't really value education very much. But I do want to point out, though, that the money that the Chicago Teachers Union is asking, as I understand it, the 144,000 would be the maximum, and that would be after 30 years of teaching. Which after 30 years of teaching, most educators do have master's degrees, advanced doctorate degrees. Like, I think, I see two doctors here. I also have a doctorate degree. It's very common. And if you look at the business world, if you've been in the business world for 30 years and you're not making 144,000, you probably made several mistakes, right? In the business world, it's common to make 144,000 after just 10 years, right?
Not
So we're
even.
not
I
even.
mean, after a year, you might get a bonus that takes you way past that.
Absolutely. If you come in with an MBA to some companies, you could have 144,000 in your first year. Now it's rare, but it's not uncommon. It's not completely uncommon, I should say. And what we're saying is, or teachers should get paid more, right? Starting base salary, going higher. As far as the idea of letting them live outside the city, that's been a common argument throughout in Chicago. It was started under Mayor Daley back in the 90s, I believe. And it was primarily originally to keep the tax base here in the city. But I've recently heard that because we're transitioning for the first time in the history of our city, well over a century, they will finally have a truly elected school board. It's always been selected in some form or another or controlled by the mayor. The first time we'll have an elected school board. I've heard that now the teachers union, would not even support allowing teachers to live outside the city because those are the folks who will vote for their candidates, right? So it's kind of an interesting situation there. But it is an expensive city to live in. It's very difficult to buy a home. And so if you want and expect teachers to live here in the city, you have to pay them accordingly, and you have to pay them competitively. As far as what it'll do for the profession, one of the problems is that we don't respect teachers very much. It's seen as, a charity profession to some extent. And if you pay it accordingly, competitively with, other business professions, it will raise the esteem of the profession. And I think it's long overdue.
Well, what is your book, Pencils Down, saying? And I mean, and what is the subtitle on the book?
Yeah, it's a long one. It's here, I actually have a copy. But career journeys of educators who left the profession and what we can learn from the crisis in education. And I wrote this book after I left education, and almost immediately, and I had a bit of a legal dispute with the district at the time. I would get text messages, calls from colleagues saying, how do I get out? How do I make the transition? And that was before COVID. During COVID, it ramped up even more. And so my co-author, Nayeli Suarez-Gas, she's my career coach, and I would just forward them to her. Long story short, after on the 12th person, I said, this is a book, right? Clearly it's needed. We talked to dozens and dozens of educators who left the field, who went to anything but education. We surveyed hundreds. And what's interesting, especially in relation to this conversation, is that money, of course, is valued and it's deserved, but that's not the main reason why most left. Most left because of the lack of respect. Most left because of the lack of work-life balance. And if you think of why a lot of people went into teaching, they went into it thinking they get their summers off, or they could, get off work at 3:30 and go pick up their own children, right? A lot of people got into it traditionally for this work-life balance, and that has completely eroded over the past 20 years. And so you have people working, teachers, 12-hour days, 10, 12-hour days, 5 days a week. They put in a year's worth of work within that short school year. They work over breaks. They work over summer. They do a lot of voluntary hours. They left, not because of the pay. They left because of the lack of well-being. They were burned out.
Now, and the esteem that's not accorded to the profession.
Yeah,
I mean, that means a lot. That means a lot. We, of course, have Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, who is the head of Push Excel. And we're so excited that you are with us today, because I think it's high time that we have this discussion. But we've been joined by one of the premier educators, I just feel, so blessed to have all of you here today. She's a National Education Policy Director for Push Excel. But of course, she's been Deputy Superintendent of Schools, one of the youngest in the country to really scale those heights in education. And we thank God for you, Dr. Sonia Whitaker. Thank you for being
Yes,
here
please.
today. Well, let me ask you, Reverend Wilson, because you've been with the Board of Education in Chicago. Um, what gives? Because I think that I really think that the esteem that the profession deserves, it's not there. And in America, you measure esteem by money. It's unfortunate, but it's true.
Well, I think several things. First of all, a starting salary for a teacher in Chicago is something like $40,000 with plus benefits. That's not enough to ask somebody to be in a classroom and you have multiple issues within that classroom. You have inadequate resources, support resources. The Chicago Public Schools do not have a social worker in every school every day. They're rotating throughout the building, yet our children are living in trauma on a daily basis. If you have a new person coming out of college with all of the teaching preparation, $40,000 does not allow you to pay back your student loans. And so you're in debt, and now I'm in a combat situation, and I say that not jokingly, but factually.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a number of qualified people who will not go into teaching for that amount of money. They will go into corporate America to other places because they can't afford to teach. It's just cost prohibitive, particularly if you're teaching in the inner city.
I was going to say, isn't that a national problem?
It's a national problem when you're teaching poor, disadvantaged, under-resourced children. And you have school buildings that are inadequately resourced and poorly staffed. You don't have social workers. You don't have enough availability.
Nurses.
You don't have art. You don't have nurses.
Yeah.
You don't have the things that you need in an ordinary school. In addition to that, I worked for CPS. Everybody wants to be an administrator because you're not in the classroom, you make more money, and you can help make some decisions that guide the classroom. Teachers deserve more money. Our teachers make less than tradesmen in those buildings. Janitors, starting salary, engineers make the people that have to open and close your building. I'm not saying they shouldn't make money, but how do you have a person who has to give the information to your child, whether you're going to go into a career or
in the trades, or vocational or
trade
academic, right?
or an educational path? I'm the one that has to impart the knowledge first through 12th grade before they ever get to college, before they ever get to a trade school. I'm that person, and yet you don't think enough of me to pay for me, to give me the quality support team that I need. I'll go to corporate America, particularly those, and Dr. Whitaker can talk about this, who are in the sciences, technology, engineering, math. I'm not going to waste my energy and not have enough money to live off of. And I'm telling you, these students graduating in debt, education has become an unwelcomed option for students.
But Reverend Wilson, even if you don't have debt, $40,000 a year,
it's nothing.
You can't make it. You can't live in Chicago for that.
No.
You certainly can't live in New York for that, Dr. Reeves. You can't even live in many of our suburbs because they're expensive, Dr. Whitaker.
And
you can't live in America on $40,000 a year.
And you can't get a car so that you could drive from your suburban place.
You can't afford public transportation.
No.
I mean, it's just, look, anytime one of the big box stores that we all know, the biggest one in the country, one of the biggest in the world, part of the intake process was having their employees learn how to apply for public aid. We have put our teachers in that position, and needing public assistance, there's nothing wrong with it. But to have a system that structurally puts people in that position, I think it's a horrible thing. I mean, and for you to take, as you made the point, Dr. Byer, 30 years to get there. Oh, come on.
And
That's
wait, and
ridiculous.
you give a signing bonus to someone that's an athlete that had to attend school to become an athlete, either high school or college, and yet you give them signing bonuses to
Uh-huh.
kick the ball, throw a ball, and you don't think enough of the people that prepare the way for them to get to wherever they go.
But pay them, and pay them too, because
Yeah, pay the teachers.
I don't believe in these false choices, because you have these athletes who are generating at the high school and at the college level certainly
College
billions
level.
of dollars.
Yeah,
Well, high school is now getting very competitive too.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's why, I must say, the head of our teachers union, they gave her a lot of grief because she put her child in a particular school. I said, wait, wait, wait. Her child is a college prospect in athletics and an income generating sport. You have to send your child to a particular high school so they can get recruited.
To a
It's
particular,
not that it's
yeah.
not that simple anymore. They start early. They start young. But Dr. Whitaker, what do you see? Because
You
I just what do
Well,
you
one of the things, first of all, I thank you for the opportunity, and I really appreciate the fact that I'm actually talking to you from my office right now, where the stuff goes down, right in district. When you all were talking, the first thing that actually came to my mind is the impact of the national teacher shortage on teachers that show up to work every single day. People are not talking about that enough. We know that the national teacher shortage exists. Most of us are cognizant of the fact that it doesn't exist in all school districts, right? Some of the more affluent school districts serving majority affluent and or majority white students aren't experiencing the same type of shortage that say I'm experiencing in the south suburbs of Illinois. And what I mean by that is one of the things that we need to be cognizant as we think about teacher pay and teacher raises is that as a direct result of the teacher shortage, we are now asking them to take on double the number of students that they would normally take. Meaning, if a substitute teacher is not available, then my teacher goes from 20 in a class to 40 in the class. And even in my system alone, you all, I have several schools where 50% of the teaching staff is substitute teachers. How do we expect to cause for statistically significant improvements in student performance? I'm not even talking about how do we expect to get them the mental health services they need or the food that they need. I'm jumping all the way to this notion that our goal is to make sure that they experience academic success in school. How do we make that happen when half of the teachers in the building are substitute teachers? We even, just as late as last week, I'm analyzing assessment results, not just on the state assessments, but on the assessments that we use in district, like all school districts across our nation. And the data told me what I figured would happen in schools where the teachers are certified and qualified to do the work, even with all of the stressors that teachers are experiencing. They're the ones that are producing results in the classrooms and in schools where a greater majority of the substitute teachers are, which we love, which we need more of, which we appreciate. The students are not making the type of academic gains that we know that they're capable of making. So let me make a connection. So now we're asking teachers to teach for 40 something thousand dollars. Now we're asking for teachers to bear the burden of having to make up for the fact that we have a national teacher crisis because we can't get anybody to come into the profession. On top of that, we're asking them to produce results by which all the way at the state level, the schools and the districts are given a grade. Like there's no waivers right now. Talk about passion. We don't get a waiver from the Illinois State Board of Education, which I work in harmony with. But the reality is they don't say that because of the national teacher shortage. They don't say things like because 50% of your teaching staff is substitute teachers, that you get a waiver from what our expectations are relevant to student performance. That doesn't happen. And that leads to stress of our teachers. So I think we need to consider things like when Reverend Jeanette, who I respect dearly, was talking, I wrote a little word down and I thought perks. I know that the mayor, along with the leadership, Chicago Public Schools, are in negotiations. So I started to think about things like, well, what can we do for teachers in addition to raising their salaries? How about we pay for, believe it or not, I'm going to say gym memberships. They're stressed out. They need places. We say students need recess. Things like paying for them to go back to school to obtain some of these degrees. If we're not going to wipe out their debt, I know a lot of teachers who don't make enough money but are still interested in, as Reverend Jeanette said, going into administration. We have a large influx of bilingual students, right? If we think about the migrants and the impact of those students are making their way into our schools, and all of our teachers are not equipped. They want to go back to school. That's the type of stuff they're saying to me. But I got a rock star teacher candidate right now who's getting ready to drop out of a grad school program. It breaks my heart because she can't afford to pay to go to grad school. And she's willing to go through all the stress that she's experiencing right now and still obtain another degree. But she doesn't have the money to foot the bill for grad school. So I'll stop right there because I can go on and on.
No,
I'm in the trenches of this like every single day.
That's why you need to get Dr. Byers' book, Pencils Down: Career Journeys of Educators Who Left the Profession.
I cannot believe
And
I'm
what
not
we can
hit
learn
hard.
from the crises in education. Oh, you got to get it.
We have to talk, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Because I mean, the studies are out. You're leaving.
Yeah, you all no, and I have to tell you one other thing, and I'll be quiet. But for years now, literally for 15 years, Northern Illinois University, right here in Illinois, hosts a major teacher job fair. And for 15 years, I have gone every single spring to the job fair. 15 years ago, we couldn't get enough people at my level to interview all the people that were in line. Do you all know the line was so short a few months ago when I went to the same job fair? Normally, I would take a picture of it and talk about it. I am being sincere when I tell you that the lines were so small that I cried in the gym where we normally recruit, and I refused to take a picture of it. Now, that's pretty heavy. There was nobody. We had 25 school districts, people at my level and beyond. 5 and 6 of us from 25 school districts at every single table, and less than 4 teachers at those lines. It was unbelievable.
Why did you speak to anyone?
I did. Well, I walked from table to table to talk to my peers, essentially other superintendents, other assistant superintendents that have talked about a number of different strategies that they have employed to get people interested in the profession. I'm not sure if you've talked about this, but there's one, I think the political landscape right now, because it's one thing to pay them, and I'm sure, and I'll pull back that Mr. Byer or Ms. Dr. Reeves can talk about this, but the impact of politics on public education, and more specifically, the teachers that are required to deliver instruction related to the ban on books and the like, are also turning people off to the profession. So they're not entering right now.
So would it be fair to say that we have a major crisis in education on that side? We keep looking at the children, but we have a crisis with the teachers, and I mean, and teachers are painted, they're smeared.
Absolutely.
They're not doing enough. They're not raising the test scores. I'm like, wow.
And that's why, Santita, I'm going to push back on this, and I know we're on national. I have a real hard time with listening to people say that kids can't read, that Black children are not literate, that Black children or brown children or poor white children are not competent. When we already know there was a big push 10 years ago in Illinois, we used the term highly qualified teachers, that they must be placed in front of high qualified teachers. And now we don't have any teachers at all. But then we put out test scores, and like I said, in grade school districts, and suggest that schools are failing children. When what we have failed to do is to address this from a public policy perspective and the like.
Well, jump in. Dr. Reeves, I know you have to leave soon.
So I know when I started teaching 25 years ago, my salary was about $33,000. And I came out of corporate America making that salary. Dr. Byer actually didn't start teaching because of the summers off, because I've never had a summer off in 25 years. I've never had a summer off, and I never leave the building at 3 o'clock. And you are right. There are a lot of people who got into education for that reason. To hear that we're in 2024 and we have teachers making $44,000 a year, just 11,000 more than I was making 25 years ago, is very, it breaks my heart. In New York, in our last contract negotiation, the base salary for someone with a bachelor's degree, and only a bachelor's degree, is 64,000. I think it's somewhere 64,000, maybe 478. Someone who has 2 master's degrees or a master's degree plus 30 credits, making approximately $136,000. And that's this year. The salary goes up to, I think, $155,000 by 2027. The starting salary at that time will be approximately $70,000. So when we sat down to negotiate the contracts over the last couple of years, we were very mindful to ensure that we were giving all teachers an opportunity to live separately from work. And that's what we tried to do when we sat and negotiated the contracts. We've also this year, it never been done. When we actually ratified our contract, it included bonuses. It included a sign-in bonus of about $3,000, and every year a retention bonus of $1,000. We kind of mirrored what was going on in some sense. There were certain things that were going on in California. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of all the strikes that's been going on with teachers across the country in the last 3 years. Because this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize. And Dr. Whitaker, you said something that we had to be mindful of coming out of the pandemic a few years ago. We've been told that we have to ensure that we focus on social emotional learning for our students because of the needs of those students. But at no point in time did anyone say we need to focus on the social emotional needs of the educators who are going to be in the classroom with those students. So you're asking teachers to do something that you didn't think of for them.
Hold on.
Hold
that, because Dr. Byer has been writing. Stay right there. Dr. Byer, I want you to speak to that because you did that very forcefully in the book.
Yeah. And just briefly that, I have a lot of friends who are principals and superintendents across the country. And, I do a lot of work in the corporate sector now as well. And I saw when I left education how much they focus on the well-being of employees. And there's a good reason, because the cost to recruit, hire, train, and retain an employee, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, possibly. And you want to get the best and you want to keep the best. And so corporations, the smart ones at least, invest heavily in keeping their employees happy by giving them well-being. They say, after hours, unless there's an emergency, unless you have a big project, don't check your email after hours. Don't check it on the email. That's your time. We never hear that in education. And so when I realized this, I contacted all my friends who are superintendents and principals across the country, and I said, what are you doing for what are you doing for well-being? And every single one would rattle off a long list of programs. And I said, well, I know those programs are all for children. What are you doing for the adults in your building?
Right.
Pause. Nothing. No response. Nothing. I spoke to someone in the talent department at Chicago Public Schools and asked the same thing. What are you doing? So we know we need to do something. We just hired someone from corporate who said we have to do this. A couple of weeks later, I think they invested like $24,000 in the entire district to address this, right? It's long overdue, and this is why people are leaving. It's not just the salary, but it's just the fact that not only do teachers not have perks, they have negative perks because they have to buy half the supplies in their classroom.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I
can say this.
But see, let me say this. That's why I'm bringing this up today, because we look at how we're slipping globally Our children are.
Mm-hmm.
And we're blaming the children, we're blaming the teachers. We're
Mhm.
not taking responsibility for what we do not invest in education.
Mhm.
We will invest in bombs, not books.
Mm-hmm.
We want to train people. We don't want to educate people. We want to put you in a factory, and there's nothing wrong with factories, but we don't even respect them as much as we need them. We don't respect people who work. But I mean, certainly a developed mind, whether it takes the academic or the vocational track, we don't respect that. We are flushing out our vocational schools, and everybody's not going to be doctor, lawyer. And I promise you, when I need my home constructed for an issue, I don't want a lawyer or a doctor. I want someone with a solid vocational background. But we're not doing any of that. And we're not respecting these teachers. And you know how I know? Because you're not getting paid. You know how I know? There's no one's paying attention to their well-being. If,
Well,
if I go if I go work in Silicon Valley, whatever, there's a gym on the premises. I can
Yeah.
get food. I can get all this stuff. I can't get that in the school. That's terrible.
Well, one of the things that I did as a chapter leader at my school, I sat with the principal and said, "Well, if you want us to be these phenomenal teachers, you have to invest in us phenomenally, right?"
Mm-hmm.
So I created a wellness PD program for the staff, where the staff, everyone, that it included administration, it included paraprofessionals, included school aides, everybody in the building. Um, During our PD session, our professional development session, we had at least once a month a wellness professional development. And that wellness professional development would be led by, and it was successful. It's been successful. It's led by a staff member or a group of staff members, um, whatever it is that they're good at. So we have an art teacher who is great at ceramics. So we had a wellness PD in ceramics. We had a safety agent who was good at making centerpieces. So we had a workshop on making centerpieces. We had someone who is trained, she trains people how to work out the right way. And,
Mm-hmm.
not a phys ed teacher, a regular English teacher who has been trained as a trainer. And she did a wellness class called La Blast, where they were dancing and exercising. And, we had paraprofessionals who were dancers who were they facilitated their own workshops for, staff members who would sign up. And all I did was I put out a request from staff members to volunteer to facilitate these workshops. They could tell me whatever workshop it is that they wanted to facilitate. If there was something that they wanted to do that was not on my list, as long as they gave me a description of it, I added it to the list, and then I put it out to the entire building, and I told people to sign up. And on that PD Friday, professional development is huge in education, but when we look at what it is they're developing, a lot of times it's things that we already know, and they're just recycling and claiming to reinforce.
But
But
Dr.
on
Reeves,
those Fridays, we were developing us,
as
right?
important as that is, we don't have a national plan.
We
I
don't.
remember, I remember
We
when,
don't.
because I only have about 10 minutes left here, but I remember when, well, really 8, when when Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. was in Congress, he and Reverend Frank Watkins uh, researched and wrote up an amendment to the Constitution, education amendment, because there is no guarantee. You have no right to an education in America. The rights we have are encoded in our Constitution, and education is not one of them.
Mm.
And he was seeking for all Americans to have equal access to an equal high quality education. And that would be a global approach. And I'm thinking we need that. I remember because it's next to Homeland Security, that was the last presidential level, cabinet level position that we developed. Dr. Mary Frances Berry was the one Who developed it? He didn't ask her to be secretary, but he sure did ask her to create the program. And I'm just wondering where we go from here, because I can hear people now. Several of the articles that I read about this particular topic, they were pushing back. I think the ones that I sent to you, they were pushing back on teachers getting a livable wage. Because in America, people who make six-figure salaries, the low six figures, a little bit more than 100, they're still living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, there's no walk in the park in America these days. It's hard. So, I want to give everyone a couple of minutes because we're going to have to get out of here. But I promise you, we're going to continue this conversation because I want pencils to be up, not down. We need our teachers. We can't do anything without them, but we've got to value them. Dr. Reeves, 2 minutes for you.
So I really do believe that it's high time that Chicago step into 2024 and beyond and realize that if the goal is to ensure that every child in Chicago succeeds, then they need to pay the teachers and staff a wage that is beyond what they're paying now. I mean, it's really painful to even think of anyone living off of 40 something thousand dollars in Chicago or even New York for that matter. I think we need to change our values. We need to value education and the people who are tasked with delivering that education. And, it shows realistically in how we treat them and how we pay them. That shows value. The value that we're placing on a teacher who is expected to ensure that that child is a lifelong learner. If the value we're placing on them is only half of what can sustain them on a daily basis, because really 44,000 can't pay the bills, buy milk, and give you something to eat, right? Something is going to be lacking. Somebody's living in a shelter.
It's a place to live. You need to be on public assistance.
You need to be on public assistance. So I think right now, Chicago needs to ensure that they're showing the value that they have truly in our children by ensuring that they're paying the teachers and the people who are tasked to educate them a better wage.
America needs to do that, Dr. Whitaker.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I really want to get the title of Michael Byers' book again. And just to say that I pencils down, I appreciate this opportunity and that we've got to and not only raise teacher salary, but be more creative in our support of them. Again, as I mentioned, sending them back to school, paying for gym memberships, helping to pay half of their utilities. Like at this point, I'm willing to throw out all ideas necessary to make sure that they have a high quality life while they are educating our students.
Absolutely. If you care about them, Dr. Byer.
Yeah, less than 2 minutes. I just need about 30 seconds, and that's all. I think my motto these days has been, we can't expect to have healthy, balanced children if they're surrounded by burned out adults. And that's the case in every single school. Teach for America got started in 1990. It got started to fill vacancies of teaching positions in high needs districts. It's only increased. And once COVID hit, it's dramatically increased. And so we're facing a crisis the next 10 years of a teacher shortage. And so we need to reimagine how we do education, but it starts with, we need healthy, balanced teachers.
Very quickly, what does a teacher shortage do to us? And I'm going to close with you, Reverend Wilson, for 1 minute. What happens when we have this teacher shortage? I mean, because they've been leaving like by the hundreds of thousands, right?
And they've been leaving. At the same time, no one's been entering the profession, going into school to become a teacher. Right. But it compounds an already a society that's already very unequal. The ones who are affected, and I know one of the guests here has spoken about it. There's plenty of districts, North Shore of Chicago, they don't have teacher shortages. A lot of other places do. So it compounds the inequalities in our society, makes it more unequal, a lot less happy to be an American. And that's not what we want. We want everyone to be happy and proud to be an American. And we have to have a bit more equity.
Oh yeah, and all public schools are not equal. I remember when they opened Whitney Young, because I'm part of their first full 4-year graduating class. and people fought tooth and nail to get into that school. But they had pulled the top teachers from all over the city. I think everybody had a master's or a PhD. And not that that's the only metric, because it's not. But you had they intended for this school to be a great school, and guess what? 40 years later, that's what it is. And now you've got other schools that have been modeled upon it, but every school should be like that. You used to have neighborhood schools that were on par with that. We don't really have that. I mean, from coast to coast. And it's not that we're not capable, we're just not trying. Reverend Wilson, I've got 1 minute, literally.
I think we'll lose our competitive edge as it relates to educating our children in a manner that makes them competitive. We have to change our policies. We must educate, and we must pay our teachers who are educating generations to come. We have to support them, value them, and restore them to a healthy, livable wage.
Absolutely. And make sure that their health is solid. You
Check.
know, I mean, because we saw during COVID, I mean, our children they don't have computers. I mean, the internet ought to be a public utility.
Well, and the
I mean,
teachers don't have them either. Ask Dr. Whitaker.
no,
They
I'm just
had
saying,
to.
I'm saying all of them, all of this stuff we should not be begging for this. I mean, Apple is $1 trillion corporation. Give me a break. How much money do you need? And you make the money off getting my tax breaks. I'm the one funding you.
Here's what we learned quickly.
I got 30 seconds.
During COVID, we learned that teachers would go to the school campus so that they would have Wi-Fi to teach virtually.
Or the McDonald's parking lots. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, but
There you go.
we saw children sitting outside doing that. That is just
It's
unacceptable.
criminal.
It's
criminal.
abhorrent. It is abhorrent, and we are paying for that. But I believe, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I tell you what, somebody's children are going to the top schools in the country, and more than likely it's not yours. Somebody's children, some folks' children are getting educated. Some kids went to school straight through COVID without looking back. But it wasn't most of America's children. Some people got paid and did not skip a beat. But that was not most Americans, and that is shameful. And we all deserve to be treated in a humane way. And guess what? It's God's earth. So the bounty is supposed to belong to all of us, and you need to fight to get it. I'm Santita Jackson. Stay tuned for the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show. Al Jazeera, the largest Arab network, really the largest news organization in the Middle East, has been banned in Israel. And what do our students really want? What are they fighting for? What really are America's youth looking for at this time? You might be surprised. They are really looking to have a society that is meaningful, that is prosperous for everyone, and I don't mean money. Let's hear from them. We're not just going to talk about them in the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show. Back in just a minute.
Very good. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Nice meeting you.
All right.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you.
Dr. Whitaker, can I give you a call?
Yes. I'm going to get in the car. I'll call you right now while I'm driving.
Okay.
Okay.
Mwah! Sending you so much love.
Thank
Let's talk
you.
soon here.
Okay. Nice
All
job.
right. Oh, girl, you're great. Thank you.
All right.